All right, so get ready. Because today we're going deep on this whole law of attraction thing. It's definitely been something that's like captivated a lot of people, but also has a lot of baggage. So we're going to break it all down. What are like the core beliefs? Does it hold up when you really look at it? And like most importantly, what should you take away from all of this?
Yeah, it's pretty wild how the law of attraction promises this incredible power, to shape our lives just by thinking in a certain way. The basic idea is that like attracts like, meaning your thoughts and feelings are like magnets. They draw similar experiences into your reality.
Okay, so it's like if you focus on positive thoughts and really believe you can achieve something, the universe will just make it happen. I mean, it's a cool idea, especially with all these messages we see about manifesting our dream lives. But does it actually work? Is there any like real science behind all this?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's where this idea of pseudoscience comes into play. The law of attraction uses terms from real science, like quantum physics, but it twists them in ways that like don't really hold up scientifically.
Okay, interesting. So can you give us an example of that?
Sure, they often talk about thoughts having frequencies, and those frequencies attract similar frequencies in the universe. But that's like a super simplified explanation of these complex quantum principles.
Okay, so let's break that down a little. What are those quantum principles actually about?
So in quantum physics, you have these concepts like superposition and entanglement. They describe how particles act at a super tiny level. But these principles only work under very specific conditions and at incredibly small scales. They don't directly translate to like the world we experience with our thoughts. It's like using the rules of a tiny board game to explain how planets move in the solar system. The scales are totally different.
Ah, that makes sense. So it sounds like the law of attraction is using scientific sounding language to sound more legit, but without the evidence to back it up.
Exactly. And this lack of scientific support is a huge red flag when looking at any claim.
Okay, so let's talk about evidence. What about all those stories you hear about people manifesting a new car or their dream job just by thinking about it?
Those stories can be really compelling, I get it, but they aren't scientific proof. Anecdotal evidence is subjective. It can be influenced by something called confirmation bias, which is our tendency to notice and believe information that supports our existing beliefs.
So like someone who believes in the law of attraction might see all the positive stuff and think they manifested it, but ignore all the times it didn't work.
Exactly. It's important to consider other explanations.
Right, so even if people feel like they manifested something, it doesn't necessarily mean the law of attraction was the cause. It could just be coincidence, or maybe their own hard work that led to that outcome.
Exactly, you got it. We need rigorous studies to determine if there's a real cause and effect relationship.
Speaking of studies, there's one that comes up a lot with the law of attraction. It's Masaru Emoto's water crystal experiments. I remember those pictures of like beautiful symmetrical water crystals. They formed after being exposed to positive words or intentions, compared to like distorted, ugly crystals after exposure to negative words. It seemed pretty convincing at the time.
Emoto's work is a great example of how pseudoscience can be packaged to look really convincing. But his research has been heavily criticized by the scientific community.
So what's wrong with his research exactly?
Well, first off, Emoto didn't use proper controls in his experiments, so he didn't eliminate other factors that could have influenced the results.
So there could have been other things affecting the crystals.
Yes, like the temperature of the water or how it was handled. Even the subjective interpretation of which crystals were beautiful could play a role.
I see.
And another thing, his findings were never published in reputable scientific journals, which is like the standard practice to make sure research is high quality.
So basically, his experiments weren't done in a scientifically rigorous way.
Right. And his personal biases could have easily influenced the results.
And didn't Emoto refuse to take part in James Randi's $1 million challenge? That would have given him a chance to prove his claims under controlled conditions?
Yeah, exactly. His unwillingness to have his work independently verified raises a lot of questions. It's like saying you have a magic recipe, but you won't let anyone see how you make it.
That's a good analogy. So we've talked about how the law of attraction kind of twists scientific ideas and relies on anecdotal evidence and flawed studies. Is there anything else that makes this concept problematic?
Well, aside from the lack of scientific backing, one of the most concerning things is that it can create a blame the victim situation.
What do you mean by that?
So imagine someone who is really trying to apply the law of attraction. They're thinking positive thoughts and visualizing their goals, but they still fail or face hardships. What does the law of attraction tell them?
I guess he would say they weren't thinking positive enough,
Hmm.
or that they had some mental block stopping them from manifesting. So basically, it's their own fault for not attracting the good things.
Exactly, and that can be really harmful, especially for people who are already struggling or dealing with difficult situations.
Yeah, it puts all the blame on the person and ignores all the outside factors that could be contributing to their struggle.
Right, so instead of empowering people, it can make them feel even more helpless.
Wow, that's a really important point. So we've unpacked some of the key problems with the law of attraction. But I feel like we've only scratched the surface. There's still so much more to explore, like the ethical side of this belief system and why it's so popular.
Absolutely, there's a lot more to uncover. We'll dig into those aspects in the next part of our deep dive. Until then, think about what we've discussed today. What resonated with you? And what questions do you still have?
You know, it's kind of wild how the law of attraction can be used to explain away like real suffering. Is that what you meant by ethical implications?
Oh, absolutely. The idea that we create our own reality through our thoughts, well, it can lead to some messed up conclusions, especially when you apply it to things like poverty, illness, or discrimination.
Because if you're struggling, it's because you're not thinking the right thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really dangerous message, especially when it comes to health issues.
Right, like some law of attraction people say things like cancer is caused by negative thinking.
Exactly. And that can have serious consequences because it might discourage people from seeking actual medical help.
So if you get sick, it's your own fault. That's incredibly harmful and could even be life-threatening.
It is. It's like blaming the victim instead of addressing the real causes.
And it completely ignores all the other factors that can affect health.
Right, things like genetics, environment, lifestyle. It's way more complex than just your thoughts.
It also kind of feeds into this toxic positivity thing, where we're told to suppress any negative feelings, even when they're valid.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's important to remember that all emotions are normal. Sadness, anger, grief, they're all part of being human. Trying to ignore them can actually be really bad for our mental health.
So it's not about pretending to be happy all the time to avoid getting sick. It's about understanding that health is complex and getting medical advice when you need it.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between having a positive outlook and taking care of your physical and mental health.
Okay, so we've talked about the scientific problems, the ethical concerns, and the potential for harm. But the law of attraction is still super popular. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a question that's fascinated people for a long time. I think part of it is our desire for control and certainty. The world can feel really chaotic and unpredictable.
So the law of attraction is like a simple solution to complex problems. Just think the right thoughts and everything will work out.
Yeah, it's a very appealing message, especially when things are tough or uncertain.
And it taps into our natural optimism, that desire to believe that good things are possible.
Exactly. We all want to believe we have the power to shape our own destiny, and the law of attraction gives us a framework for doing that.
But as we've discussed, it's not that simple. And just relying on the law of attraction can actually be disempowering.
Yeah.
Because it ignores the importance of taking action and making choices.
You're right, a positive mindset can be helpful, but it's not magic. We need to put in the effort and make conscious decisions.
So it's not about waiting for the universe to give you what you want. It's about being proactive and creating the life you want.
Exactly. And that brings us to the importance of effort and perseverance. Success rarely comes easy. It takes work discipline and the willingness to overcome obstacles.
Right, like that saying, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You can't just sit around and visualize success. You got to put in the work and be ready to seize the moment.
Exactly. And sometimes even when we try our best, things don't go as planned. Life throws us curveballs.
So instead of blaming ourselves for not manifesting the perfect life, maybe we should focus on learning from our experiences, both good and bad.
I agree. That's a much more empowering and realistic approach than relying on a law that oversimplifies the connection between our thoughts and reality.
Okay, so we've talked about the appeal and the problems with the law of attraction, but there's one more thing I'm curious about. We've talked about the people who believe in it. But what about the people who profit from it? It's a huge industry.
Yes, that's a key piece of the puzzle. It brings us to the whole commercialization of self-help and the potential for exploitation within the law of attraction movement.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more.
Hmm.
How has the law of attraction been commercialized?
Well, just think about all the books, workshops, online courses, all dedicated to teaching people how to manifest their desires.
It's everywhere. All over social media, there are ads for manifestation coaches and courses.
Right. And while some of them might be legit, There are also people trying to take advantage. They prey on people's desires for a quick fix, selling them expensive programs that don't really deliver.
So how can people tell the difference between the real deal and a scam?
That's a great question. You have to be really careful when evaluating anything related to the law of attraction.
What are some red flags to look out for?
One big one is exaggerated claims or promises of guaranteed results. If someone says they can teach you to manifest anything effortlessly, be skeptical.
It's like those get-rich-quick schemes.
Exactly. Another red flag is lack of transparency. Be wary of anyone who is secretive about their methods or who won't answer questions.
And I guess testimonials should be taken with a grain of salt, too. We've already talked about how those can be misleading.
Absolutely. Look for evidence-based practices, things that are grounded in real psychology.
So do your research, be critical, and trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Exactly. And remember, personal growth is a journey, not a destination.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot, from the science and ethics to the psychology and the potential for exploitation. But there's one more important piece to this conversation. What are the alternatives? If the law of attraction isn't the answer, what are some more realistic approaches to creating the life we want?
That's a great question. And it's one we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. Until then, I encourage you to reflect on what we've discussed and ask yourself, if you let go of this idea of manifesting, what other paths might open up for you?
Okay, so we've spent all this time really dissecting the law of attraction, looking at what it claims and all the potential problems. But now I'm really curious about those alternative paths you mentioned. If we're not just passively manifesting, how can we actively shape our lives?
Well, that's where we move away from magical thinking, and we look towards things that are actually backed by evidence and psychology. And there's a ton of stuff to learn from here.
Okay, so let's dive in. What are some of those more grounded approaches?
One really powerful tool is goal setting, but not just wishing for something. It's about setting smart goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This framework helps you break down what you want into smaller steps, making them easier to actually do.
Well, so instead of just saying, I want to be rich, you'd say something like, I want to save this much money by this date by doing this.
Exactly. You got it. It shifts the focus from vague desires to concrete actions. And along with goal setting, there's this thing called developing a growth mindset.
Growth mindset. Remind me what that is again?
Sure, it's basically the belief that your abilities and intelligence aren't fixed. You can actually develop them through effort and learning. So instead of seeing challenges as failures, you see them as opportunities to grow.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's super empowering because it encourages you to embrace challenges, keep going, even when you face setbacks, and always keep learning and improving.
So it's not about being naturally talented. It's about developing your potential through hard work and dedication. That definitely resonates with me. It seems way more realistic than just wishing for things to happen.
It is, and it's connected to another important thing, taking responsibility for your actions. The law of attraction sometimes puts the blame on people, like if they're not manifesting correctly. But a more empowering approach emphasizes the power of making choices and owning those decisions.
So it's about recognizing that you have control over your life, even though you can't control everything that happens around you.
Exactly, you got it. And this sense of control can be super motivating. It encourages you to take action, be proactive, and make choices that align with what you value and what you want to achieve.
So it's not about sitting around and waiting for the universe to give you stuff.
Yeah.
It's about being an active participant in creating the life you want.
Exactly. And that leads us to the importance of effort and perseverance. Success rarely happens overnight. It often takes consistent effort, discipline, and a willingness to overcome obstacles.
That makes sense.
And this is where things like mindfulness and emotional regulation can be really helpful.
Ooh, okay, I'm curious about that. How do those things connect to all this?
Well, think about it. Life is full of ups and downs, right? There will be times when you face setbacks, disappointments, or even straight up failures. And that's where being able to manage your emotions, stay grounded, and keep things in perspective becomes super important.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mindfulness practices like meditation can help you develop self-awareness, emotional regulation, and resilience, which are essential for dealing with those inevitable challenges that come up.
So it's not about ignoring or pushing down negative emotions. It's about learning how to handle them in a healthy way.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing your emotions without letting them control you. And this ability to manage your emotional state can have a huge impact on your well-being and your ability to keep going through tough times.
I'm seeing how all these elements connect. Goal-setting growth mindset, taking responsibility, putting in the effort, mindfulness, they all work together. It's like a more holistic and empowering approach to personal growth.
Exactly, they all fit together. And while it might not be as simple or appealing as just manifesting what you want, it's a path that's grounded in reality, backed by research,
Yeah.
and ultimately more likely to lead to real fulfillment and well-being.
That's a really great point. Instead of looking for shortcuts or magic solutions, we can empower ourselves by embracing the process of growth learning and taking action. It might not always be easy, but it's a more rewarding and fulfilling path.
I couldn't agree more. And remember, you don't have to go through this alone. There are tons of resources, communities, and supportive people who can help you along the way.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into the law of attraction. We explored its promises, its problems, and some powerful alternatives. It's been a really interesting journey, and I hope you, our listeners, found it insightful and empowering.
I hope so too. And remember, the most important journey is the one you take within yourself.